Losers Monday. That's really all I can call this show. A Sunday night football waited 2 weeks for Sunday night for a drubbing of epic proportions. Worst loss that I can remember the Packers taking in, oh God, probably since 2015 against Arizona, just because if you add in expectations and all that other stuff that goes into it, I can't think of many that have played out worse than that just from an embarrassment proportion. But that's where we're at this point. I'm your host this evening. I am Jacob Westendorf, and I am joined by Jason Perrone. Jason, I can't even complain. Every single tweet that you made last night, even though I didn't really pay that much attention, probably were all justified.
Well, I didn't watch the second half, so I spared everybody that. And yeah, it was not positive at all, but there wasn't a lot of positive to be had on the field. So, from the jump, it was ugly. And I think I might need to retire the whole history parallel thing, because I think back to 2015, and the Denver game was the first really bad performance coming off of a bye. They didn't play well in that game, and they got beat handily by the Broncos to end their perfect record to start the season. But that was not their worst performance. Then the Arizona performance was the second, and I can't stand the idea that there might be another clunker in them this season, even though they've already had two. The last two road games have been very forgettable. And yes, it is a loser's Monday. It has been an ugly one. A lot of conversation on the socials, that's for sure.
Yeah, it hasn't been fun. Let's just very much say that's the case. It hasn't been fun. We're going to start with some positive stuff. I mentioned there wasn't a whole lot, but there was a few things. First of all, Motley Crue has announced a reunion tour. So I promised that I would bring that up on the show. So if you're going to a show, join me and we shall shout at the devil, and very much enjoy that. The other positive thing, and I do want to talk about it, is Darius Smith. Darius had a special sack celebration planned for last night, and it was to honor the wife of one of the Packers equipment managers who was sick, not doing well. And he held up the shirt and said, "We love Eileen," which is the name, obviously, of the equipment manager's wife. Just kind of a cool moment on a night that didn't have a whole lot of them, but kind of a silver lining, if you will, from the standpoint of this team is pretty easy to root for. There have been Packer teams that have been kind of mundane, or the character is like whatever. Darius Smith is a very likable person, it appears. And I only say it appears just because I don't know him personally, and I never want to just assume that about certain people. But I find this team easy to root for, and Darius Smith is one of the biggest reasons why. So, Jason, just a little appreciation here for Darius, and how happy are you that he is the Packers' kind of unspoken captain?
Well, if it makes, the best illustration of it is I do the Game Balls Lane Calls column at Cheesehead TV. And that was the only game ball that I handed out, was for Darius Smith's his efforts there. He got a sack, but it wasn't about the sack because there wasn't anything to celebrate on the field. But that right there is for him to come in, justify the money they spent on him, because he was a lot more expensive than Preston. So he was the most expensive free agent that they got. For him to come in and justify, those guys together have put together a season of sacks that is far greater than anything they would have gotten for Khalil Mack had they given up all of their 18 first rounders to get Khalil Mack 2 years ago, and be a leader on this team. And I think back to the situation with the off the field issue that he had, getting pulled over for speeding and all this stuff that went on there, and the way he handled that. This Packers team, I can't imagine what they would be without him. I don't know how else to put it. They need guys like that. And for him to come in from the outside and be a positive influence like that, they're going to need that moving forward. They've got 5 games left and still a lot in front of them to accomplish. It's going to be because of guys like that that keep the team on track.
Yeah, and those are the voices in the locker room that Aaron Rodgers refers to in his press conferences each of the last 2 times that they've lost. Those are the guys he's referring to. I'm sure Rodgers is involved in that as well, but Darius Smith, Adrian Amos, Preston Smith, just some of the new voices that are in Green Bay that have changed the culture in the locker room. And there was a positive the last time Green Bay lost. Obviously, they came home, had some medicine with Carolina. They were able to win that game and go into the bye week. But then coming off of that's the part where this gets weird, and I don't know like what it says or what it means, and I'm trying not to overreact to one game, but at the same time, you come off a bye week, and here's the thing, like you go to LA, there's one night where, you get there a little early, you party your ass off, and then you show up maybe not ready to play. Once, that's one thing. This was off the bye. This was off of a team that was playing their third game in 13 days. And their previous two games were a stressful win against the Arizona Cardinals that came down to the wire, and essentially a 5-quarter game on a Monday nighter against the Seattle Seahawks. And that's not an easy team to play. The California thing just can't be an excuse. And I know the Packers have been historically awful on the West Coast, but I'm just not buying it. I mean, it's football. There are plenty of teams that go from the Midwest to the West Coast and win games and play well. The 1997 Green Bay Packers are an example. The Packers' second Super Bowl season under Brett Favre. A lot of people kind of forget this because that championship game wasn't all that memorable, but that game was played in San Francisco. The 49ers fought their ass off all year because they didn't want to come to Lambeau Field, and Green Bay still went in there and beat them down because they were the better team. And I think that's what – I mean, Jason, we kind of talked about this a little bit today. If you had told me in August that on November 25th the Packers are going to lose to the San Francisco 49ers, but that will drop them to 8-3, I would have been over the moon. I thought Green Bay was going to win 9 games total this season. Now, granted, they still could only win 9 games this season, but at this point that would mean a disaster down the stretch for that to happen. And I don't think – it just would be really hard for them to lose 2 games between the Giants, a home game against Washington, a home game against Chicago, and a road game against the Lions, who won't be playing Matthew Stafford by that point. So in order for that to happen, the Packers would have to have a disaster to finish their season. However, their record did cause some expectations, I think, to adjust. And I think people were looking at this team and hoping this was a measuring stick game. The 49ers were 9-1 coming into this game. You win and you have a chance to control your own destiny for the number 1 seed. And like they've done too many times, I'm trying to think in the regular season, because obviously postseason games are different. But in the regular season, when is the last time that Green Bay has won a game like this one? Where it's like, okay, Green Bay has a chance to prove how good they are in a matchup between two of the NFC's best. It's been a really long time. They didn't win any.
Seattle in late in 2016 is the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, and that's a game where it's like Green Bay was like, that's when you thought the run the table thing was for real. Because like, okay, they beat Philly and they beat Houston, but like big whoop. And then, then Seattle came to Green Bay, team that was kind of their kryptonite, matches up well with them. They have Russell Wilson, those kinds of things. But then, yeah, I think that's probably the last one. That was 3 years ago. Green Bay hasn't won a game like that in quite some time. Now, this year, I know they beat the Vikings, and they were up 21-0 on the Vikings at one point, and they were up 31-3 on the Dallas Cowboys at one point. Those are 2 playoff teams, and I'm not discounting that. I think what we learned last night is that the Green Bay Packers are a Tier 2 team. And if you had told me before the season, because last year they were not in Tier 2. They were a top 12 pick. One of the worst teams in the NFL. Okay? They are not that anymore. And I think that's fair to say. They've proven that over a course of time because bad teams don't start 8-2. That just doesn't happen. Okay? That doesn't mean Green Bay's a great team either, though. And I think what we've learned is that there is a decided difference at this point between the league's elite, which includes, as of right now, I would say the New England Patriots, the San Francisco 49ers, and the Baltimore Ravens, and that might be it. I think the Saints might just be a notch below elite. That's a game I could see Green Bay potentially winning if some things break the right way for them in a given matchup like that. However, I do think that we learned that as of right now, and things can change, injuries are the ultimate leveling of the playing field. Players get better. It's a 1-game sample, win or go home. It's a 1-week thing. And it could very well be that. But I think that we've learned that Green Bay is not an elite team, at least not right now. Jason, is that fair to say?
Oh, it's beyond fair. I mean, this is one of those losses where I don't know which direction this team's going to go. I mean, that sounds like a lot of hyperbole, and it's typical me. The sky is falling, but I don't care that they've got 4, maybe even the rest of their games are winnable. I don't know what to expect even next week against the Giants. So, yeah, I agree with you. I think 8-2 is not 8-3 is not something you just slough off. The 49ers are a good team, and sometimes it's hard to give credit to the other side because you want to beat them so bad. And the 49ers and Packers have had a long history. You mentioned going out west, and the Packers have never really had the issues going out west that I've seen that like they've had this season. I mean, they've between 1990 and the Jerry Rice fumbled playoff game, almost 8 years elapsed before the Niners beat the Packers. The Packers had won every matchup for those 8 years, and then after that, they didn't beat the Packers again until 2012.
Green Bay went out there in 2015 and won against Colin Kaepernick. Yeah. One of the worst quarterback games I've ever seen, but they still were able to beat the 49ers on the West Coast.
I saw them in person beat the Chargers in San Diego. I've seen them play competitive games against Seattle. We all know how some of those ended, but they were competitive games. And this whole going out, I've seen them play, once in a while, good against Arizona. The travel thing is not – guys travel in college. Like, that whole thing is just baffling to me. And I'm not going to buy that travel was the issue. I think it was more of an issue in the Chargers game, and they just, got too full of themselves. And, okay, that happened. This game was just a good old-fashioned butt-whooping, and they just came up against a juggernaut that they were not prepared for. The thing that bothers me more is they had 2 weeks to prepare, and so you don't win a road game, But to put up a performance like that, that's the bigger issue that I have. And so one of the things I've been tweeting about a lot today's Monday, has been the coaching. I'm not off the Matt LaFleur bandwagon, but I think it's legit to ask the question of how confident are you in this coaching staff that they can get the most out of this team these last 5 games and whatever comes in the playoffs? Because I still think this is a playoff team. There's 6 teams that are going to get in. If you look at the playoff field in the NFC, the Packers absolutely belong among them. I'm not saying that they deserve the first seed, and that looks like a reach over the moon. I have no idea how they're going to pull that off, but they absolutely belong in the playoffs. But coaching has got to step up. I know there were a lot of ties between Matt LaFleur and Kyle Shanahan and his staff, and he's worked with some of those guys, and he's good friends with some of those guys. And it's kind of like I kind of joked with you, Jake, and said, I have to wonder if, as they were sending off Matt LaFleur, if his buddies weren't waving goodbye with one hand and kind of covering their mouths and stifling laughter with the other, because he came in and got his butt kicked by his buddies. His friends absolutely were. They were on the sideline. They might as well have been on the sideline and in the huddle. And Matt LaFleur acted like he had never coached a football game in his life. I don't know how that happens coming off of a bye. And I don't know how concerned I should be about that.
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. Something that was brought up today by a lot of different people is, and I noticed it on the broadcast too, is that when things are going poorly, it looks like a lot of Mike McCarthy's offense. And Mike McCarthy's offense is fine if you have Jordy Nelson, James Jones, Greg Jennings, and Randall Cobb, and Donald Driver, and Jermichael Finley, and all these other. Green Bay doesn't have that. And I think that has been made obvious too against some of the league's better teams, is that it's Devontae Adams and a lot of number 4 wide receivers. I have no idea what value Geronimo Allison brings to the team at this point, and I don't mean to pile on the dude. He's a nice story. But if you're going to have no athleticism whatsoever from an NFL standpoint, I feel like I have to qualify that because some idiot will say, well, he's a better athlete than you. Well, no shit. Look at me. I'm a freaking fat guy. He should be a better athlete than me. Let's be honest here. Okay? But if you're going to have no athleticism from that way, you have to catch everything. And Geronimo Allison now has 1/3 of the team drops, according to Zach Jacobson of Packer Report. That can't happen. Not when you're that guy. And he has no athleticism. They're running a lot of stuff with him around the line of scrimmage, and it doesn't make any sense. And, he's just not athletic enough to make up for some of those shortcomings. And I'm not saying that they need to play Ryan Grant or that's like a fix-all. Playing Ryan Grant has kind of become the new put Jeff Janis on the field or play Jared Abbrederis from 2015, for example. What could go wrong? Well, remember, Ryan Grant was a street free agent that they picked up before week 6 or 7. So if he was that good, he probably wouldn't have been unemployed. He's a break glass and in case of emergency type of player, and the Packers haven't had an emergency that they've deemed necessary to do that. The problem is they have a lot of inconsistent players at the wide receiver position. Now, I know some people are jumping in and saying, oh, I'm so glad, sarcastically, that Gutekunst didn't trade for a wide receiver at the trade deadline. And it just wouldn't have mattered. I think that's what, there's a lot of people, what we do, and people are doing it, the Bears, for example. People for Chicago cling to the fact of, oh, we don't have a quarterback and we don't have a kicker. Like, okay, those two things are probably true, but that's not the only reason that the Bears are a last place or a third place team currently. The Packers aren't unable to beat some of these teams because they don't have a second wide receiver. Like, there's a lot of different things that go into this. First of all, a wide receiver does not block Nick Bosa last night. He doesn't block that vicious 49er front. And I'm not saying the Packers need to upgrade their offensive line, but their offensive line played like crap last night, and I'll get to that, more on that in a minute. The Packers need help in a lot of different places, and it's funny to me to watch these people say, well, they don't have any wide receivers, and I'm so glad that Brian Gutekunst hoarded all those precious little draft picks, again, sarcastically, and then on the other hand say, oh my God, Green Bay has so many needs. It's amazing they're 8-3. Both of those things can't be true. They can't be hoarding precious draft picks and have too many draft needs. If that's the case, then Gutekunst was smart not to make a trade for a receiver like that. Emmanuel Sanders didn't do anything last night either. He caught one pass. Now, would he have helped in Green Bay? Sure. Would a few things have gone different? Probably. But enough to make up from a 37-8 ass whooping? No way. Not a chance in hell that makes a difference. Jason, you mentioned the coaching. I think this is the first time that Matt LaFleur has drawn some legitimate criticism. Just because, again, like I mentioned, you lay that egg that one time in California, cool. It's really hard to defend getting your ass whooped like that in San Francisco when you don't even bother to show up, and it looks like you spent the weekend or the week self-scouting allegedly, and you give a 50-50 split to Jamal Williams and Aaron Jones, and you play a lot of 11 personnel and run static formations and no motion and no illusion of complexity, and you're just kind of running some stuff into the wind. That sounds an awful lot like what we criticized Mike McCarthy for at the end of his tenure in Green Bay. Now, I will give Matt LaFleur credit. He has done well throughout the year of adjusting some things. But the biggest and most damning part to date right now is that since Davante Adams came back, Aaron Jones has one catch for -1 yard. I'm sorry, but this offense was humming when Aaron Jones was a focal point in the passing game. And I love Jamal Williams. He does a lot of good things. But this offense is legitimately worse when Aaron Jones is not on the field. I'm not saying that Jones needs to play 90% of the snaps, but 65, yes. And
maybe also on fourth down when you're trying to get a fourth down to inject some life into your team and try to score some points. And once again, it's Jamal Williams on the field and Aaron Jones on the sideline.
See, you're the second person to say that to me, and I'm going to have to look at that play because the broadcast and the gamecast says it was Aaron Jones. But now two separate people have told me it was Williams, so I don't know. But either way, even if that is the case, yes, if that was Jamal Williams, that needs to be Aaron Jones. You don't need to outthink it, so to speak. Get the ball to your best players and go from there. That being said, there is time for them to make some adjustments. There is some medicine coming for them. The Giants are one of the worst teams in football. Now, I'm not saying that the Giants can't beat the Packers because they can. But as we'll get to later in the week, I really struggle to see that unless Saquon Barkley just runs for 350 yards. You want to talk about, so the Niners have some matchups. Here's what the game really comes down to against the Niners. And I've been talking for a long time, so I apologize. But the matchups that Green Bay should have won, they didn't. They have the better quarterback, in theory. They have the better pass rush. matchup against the offensive line. So, meaning like Darius and Preston Smith are really good. The 49ers pass rush as a whole is better than those guys. But Darius and Preston against the Niners tackles is a better matchup than the Niners pass rush against Brian Bulaga and David Bakhtiari. Now, Brian Bulaga got hurt. That changed a few things, but Green Bay didn't win those matchups. The other thing that they didn't do is they made the matchups that were in their favor matter. They take care of the ball. They were -1 in turnovers last night, and that turnover gave the 49ers the ball at the 2-yard line. Easy touchdown right off the bat. They were unable to move the ball up and down the field. Their special teams weakness was shown. The 49ers are a good special teams unit. The Packers are the worst in the NFL. That showed up. And then you add in, they gave up a couple of big plays. Those things you can usually withstand if you make a few of your own, and they just didn't make enough of those. And the other real big one is, at the end of the day, here's the biggest problem, Jason. Nobody wants to talk about it. I said there's going to be a lot of narrative-based analysis that comes out of this game. What I mean by that is we just kind of cherry-pick some things like, oh, Colin Cowherd was talking about it today on his show. Aaron Rodgers can't win big games anymore. And we'll get to Rodgers here in a minute as well. Ridiculous. They focus on Devontae Adams too much. Maybe some truth to that, but ultimately not why they lost the game. They can't play in California. Bullshit. We talked about that earlier. This game comes down to the fact that they lost up front. And it really is a simple game, guys. If you can block and tackle, you're going to beat a lot of teams. The New England Patriots are a shining example of that every single year. Yes, they have a lot of different things that go their way and that they do really, really well. But most years, this year, they can't really block. That's why their offense is garbage. One reason. The other is that their quarterback is washed. But sorry, Boston fans. It's true.
No, don't apologize.
I refuse to apologize. You're right. That said, if you can block and tackle, you're going to win a lot of games in this league. And Owen Reese, guy who used to do Pack-A-Day with me, he's an offensive line coach at UW-Whitewater. And he tells me all the time. He told me before the year that the Bears weren't going to be good. And he said because their offensive line stinks. And his response to me was, tell me a good team that is not good up front. And one really good example of a team that regressed last year from this year to last year is the Los Angeles Rams. Why? Their offensive line last year was very good, and this year it is not. One of the biggest reasons, it's something we don't really talk about because we take the offensive line for granted in general. That's why we bitch and moan when the Packers take Elton Jenkins at 44 overall instead of a wide receiver. I get it. That said, Green Bay lost last night because they could not block Nick Bosa, Eric Armstead, Solomon Thomas, and whatever else it was that Robert Saleh was throwing at them. That's the biggest thing that it comes down to last night. Jason, I know I talked for a really long time. Do you have any thoughts on what I just said before we kind of get back on the rails here a little bit?
Well, I do stand corrected. It was Aaron Jones on the 4th down. So you're correct. It was Aaron Jones. It was not Jamal Williams. I went back and checked the box score. I had flashbacks to the Carolina game because we were both sitting in the stands watching it, wondering what the hell was happening right before our very eyes. And there the Packers are once again running the ball up the gut. Now, I don't know if there was an option on that player, if Aaron Rodgers had any autonomy at all or what the story was, but it didn't end up well. So the narratives, it's old. It's just getting old. And in this day and age of Twitter and, 18,000 of them being stuffed down our throats every day, yes, it's very exhausting and old. And I try to stay away from using cliches and narratives because I might believe some of them. But it's okay to have an original thought. It's okay to have your own opinion, your own idea of what you think is going on out there and put your own stamp on it and be original and be a little bit different and not just sheep along with somebody because, well, they're on TV, so they must know what they're talking about. That being on TV and being on the radio is absolutely no badge of correctness. So I just want to throw that out there. And as far as moving forward in some of these other games, listen, these are easy games the Packers should win. We're talking about the Giants, Washington. I mean, this schedule sets up very favorably for Green Bay. And if you look at some of the teams they're competing with for playoff seeds, they've got it a lot worse. The San Francisco 49ers, I hope they partied it up after they beat the Packers because they do not have an easy road over the next month. Green Bay, no game is easy. I'm not here to say it is. Now they have to travel the same distance east as they've gone west. So is that going to become the new thing? They can't win on the coasts. It's all crap. It's all garbage. They can win football games. One of my other concerns, and this might not be for this particular show, is What is really truly going on with Aaron Rodgers in the offense? He's a very good quarterback. He's not 2010 Aaron Rodgers, and he never will be again. I have to wonder, when he's holding onto the ball, he sees a blitz coming up the middle. This was on the fumble. He sees a blitz coming up the middle. It's coming right at him. His eyes work. He's not blind. So why is he opting? Why is it still better to hold on to the ball and take a sack versus trying to make one of your pass catchers make a play? I get he doesn't want to throw interceptions. He wants to take care of the football. They're in negative territory at that point. A turnover is not going to help. It didn't. I understand an interception would be bad. But what is going on? There's so much baffling things that have gone on. And some of these we chalked up the last couple seasons to. He was hurt. He was a bad season. He had the knee injury last year, 2 years ago when he came back. He was still dealing with the collarbone. There were things we could point to. That isn't there this year. So I'm going to be really curious as the week goes on and the All-22 comes out, and our guys, Dusty Evely and Ben Fennell and all those guys that break down the various plays have to say about the play, the routes, the footwork, because I'm really curious what's going on. It's getting cold. So, are we at that point now? And I know you're probably rolling your eyes because you don't like the drama, but are we getting to that point now where Rodgers is reaching the age, like kind of like what Favre happened late in his career, where the cold became a factor? Are we going to see that start to happen too? I don't know. I don't know what to make of it.
That I don't know about, just because he did play relatively well against Carolina, and it was cold that day. So we'll see on that. I think there's some fair questions to be had about the quarterback, though. The whole thing you said about him seeing a blitz and then trying to beat it with his legs, that's something that Ben Fennell talks about, how Aaron Rodgers he used to beat blitzes with his arm, and he would stand in and throw darts. And he's not doing that. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. And I think there's a lot of people trying to make some assumptions based on things you cannot see. And I'm a big believer in something, for example, the touchdown to George Kittle. Matt LaFleur confirmed today in his press conference that was not Kevin King's fault. That said, everybody's wanting to blame Kevin King for that play because why? We looked at what we can see on the field. It just wasn't the case. That wasn't King's responsibility. He didn't willy-nilly just turn the other way. Now, if you want to criticize Kevin King, there's room for that, certainly. But that's not what you asked. What you asked was about Aaron Rodgers. And the answer is, well, some of the answer, I think, is, I mentioned it before. There's a lot of excuses that have been made on Aaron Rodgers' behalf. Injuries, bad coach, bad offense, bad system, blah, 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 blah. And a lot of those things have changed. The only remaining excuse that I think you can give with some validity is that the offensive weaponry is pathetic. And I don't use that word. That's Jason's favorite word, and I don't use it lightly. That said, I think that it's a fair point. Richard Sherman said today in the 49ers media availability, the 49ers play zone 70% of the time. And Richard Sherman said they played mostly man coverage and that their plan was to try and shut down Aaron Jones. That tells you everything you need to know when a zone coverage primary team plays man-to-man coverage, what they think of your wide receivers. And the same kind of thing, we've seen it before. We used to always laugh, like, how do you have a single high safety against Aaron Rodgers? How does that happen, kind of thing? We used to have those conversations all the time. The problem is that the Packers have Devontae Adams, and to use a Peter Bukowskiism, the island of misfit toys. Marquez Valdes-Scantling has not taken off. You can throw me the numbers all you want. He's inconsistent. That's true. Geronimo Allison stinks. That is true. Jake Kumaro is just a dude. I don't care about more opportunities, anything like that. Alan Lazard, nice story. I don't want to get into the offseason stuff, but looking ahead a little bit, the only receiver on this roster that should be guaranteed a roster spot in 2020 is Devontae Adams. That is it. So to get back to the quarterback, there are some bad habits. That being said, take those weapons, and it's a fair point. I'm hearing you. I listen to you. I understand you. That being said, there are some things about the quarterback that need to be addressed. And he does still fall into some of his bad habits. One of them is holding the ball when he sees a blitz. Now, there is holding the ball too long, and there's holding the ball because there's nothing there. Now, that being said, when somebody's blitzing, they don't have that covered up. That's the point of the pressure. You're supposed to find your stuff and get the ball there. And there have been times that Rodgers has done that. He hasn't done that recently. The biggest one that I have an issue with is when the Packers have given up pressure this season is Rodgers still has a tendency to fade and throw the ball off of his back foot. And it's a bad habit. Brett Favre used to do that all the time. There are a lot of quarterbacks, and it can work every now and again. Rodgers has the arm to make that happen. But it's not fundamentally sound. That's why he's struggling. And I was thinking about this today. We talked about it. I am in the belief that MVP Aaron Rodgers does not exist anymore from a consistency standpoint. The fact is we have not seen Aaron Rodgers play at an MVP level consistently since 2014. And you can use
16. At the end of the season, at the end of 2016.
Well,
but yeah, I mean, for a whole season, yeah.
I was getting to that. Yeah, 2016, the run the table thing, some of the best quarterback play I've ever seen. The reality is that was 8 games. That's half a season. That is not consistency. And we've given him every reason for that because we're like, oh, he's Aaron Rodgers. But that said, Green Bay can still win that way. They can still win with the idea that Aaron Rodgers is not an MVP level player anymore. But if we started making a list, Jason, I'm sure that list would not be very long before we get to Aaron Rodgers. The problem is that list used to be 1, maybe 2 quarterbacks that you get to before you start talking about Aaron Rodgers. Now, that list is getting a little longer, at least in my opinion, as to when we get there. Now, by a little longer, I don't think I can name 10 quarterbacks I would rather have than Aaron Rodgers. Of the old quarterbacks, if you will, Breeze, Brady, Roethlisberger, Rivers, I still think Rodgers is the best one. But there are some younger guys that I think have surpassed him, one of which is playing tonight here in Lamar Jackson. But that's fine. But I still do think it's a reality that we need to start discussing, and it's a reality that the Packers need to face inside of their locker room of, can Aaron Rodgers have an MVP level game? Yes, absolutely. He did that against the Oakland Raiders. He's done that in some other games. But we have Aaron Rodgers, he can just go into God mode thing at any given moment, that's more unlikely than it has been in the past. So, Jason, when you asked, I don't think that you're saying you have a concern level. It's not that the Packers need to look to replace the quarterback. They really can't for salary cap reasons, money reasons, all kinds of different stuff. But there is at least some concern that, we used to know every game when Green Bay would go into it is, do they have the quarterback advantage? The answer is yes, every single time. Do the Packers have the quarterback advantage in every game that remains this season? Yes, they do. But they don't have it in every game like they used to. And that's a sobering reality for some. I know that there are some Packers fans that we do this stupid thing on Twitter every offseason where we're talking about who's the GOAT, Rodgers is better than Brady, blah, 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 blah. Here's the thing. And I've said it before, and I'm guilty of it, and I just want to apologize to everybody who's watching this. Aaron Rodgers is not the greatest quarterback of all time. And quite frankly, he's not even close. His peak was as good as it was. The consistency level hasn't been there, and there's a lot of different things that go into greatness than him making some really crazy, awesome throws. And I understand that he's an all-time great. He's not the greatest quarterback of all time. Neither is Tom Brady, but separate discussion. But, Jason, I guess what is your concern level the remainder of this season? Or what do you think of Green Bay having to shift their mentality towards maybe coming to grips with the fact that their quarterback, and I'm not saying he's declining, regressing, because those words tend to be bad words, but coming back to earth a little bit?
Well, they need to be aware of it. They need to understand that that's the reality of it. But I think you mentioned a couple things earlier that they've gotten away from, that they can still lean on to find production where they can't get it anymore, and that would be the running backs. And you threw one ball to Aaron Jones, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was one pass attempt. I mean, and
in a month.
And was that last night, or did they not throw any?
They threw one to him last night. It was incomplete.
I didn't watch the second half. I would have gone back and watched the second half if I needed to, but I was like, negative Nancy over here. I checked out because I've seen enough Packers football and enough Aaron Rodgers football to know that the offense was probably not going to get it together because they couldn't do a damn thing. And I wasn't going to subject my eyeballs to that, so I didn't watch it. They have to know where their strengths lie, and there's some areas of weakness there. You've talked about the receiver position. Spoiler alert, if the Packers don't go big at wide receiver in this next draft, I'm going to probably not be a lot of fun to listen to during the offseason. And when we get to the season preview show, don't be surprised if I've got the Packers under 500 because they've got to get some pass catchers. And I mean, they've got to add some speed and athleticism to that wide receiver group because they've got to make up for what Aaron Rodgers doesn't create anymore. And frankly, the problem was they leaned on his otherworldly stuff. I think you said it already, in a different way. They leaned on his otherworldly stuff for so long that, somehow these very highly paid, very capable professional GM, scout, personnel guys didn't think they needed any better pass catchers than they have. And wow, has it bitten them in the butt. The only thing they're getting back next year that they don't have right now is Equanimeous St. Brown. I don't know. He's still a question mark. I don't know how good he's going to be next year. He might be in the same boat where he should have to compete and fight for his job too.
Yep.
And if he were in the fold right now, guys, he's not the missing link. Okay. He's not the missing link, and Emmanuel Sanders is not the missing link. I don't think this offense would be that much better if Equanimeous St. Brown was out there. I don't think he was primed to have a ridiculous breakout season. There's a reason why these guys were drafted, in the 4th, 5th, and 6th rounds. So, every once in a while you find a Donald Driver. Those are the exceptions, not the rule. So
yep.
they've got it. I understand you scheme for what the defense doesn't do well. That was what concerned me about last night's game with Matt LaFleur. I don't feel like he put together a game plan that attacked anything that San Francisco doesn't do well. Now, when you've got a defensive front like that, you're going to have tough sledding all day long. Your offensive line is going to struggle. Corey Lindsey had a terrible game. I mean, every snap's at Rodgers' feet, and I don't want to.
That's a trend too. And it drives me nuts because, granted, I played that position at a much smaller level, but that seems to happen a lot more than it should. And it throws off the rhythm, timing, everything of plays. You have to get the ball above the quarterback's waist. There's so many plays where Rodgers has to go below his ankles to catch the ball. That's something that...
And my assumption is that if you're doing that, you're trying to cheat and get a jump on the defensive lineman across from you, or you're trying
that is why.
But Corey Linsley, if you're going to snap the ball low in an effort to get a leg up and you're still going to whiff on the block, then just make a good snap and get pummeled. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, that was a problem. There was a lot that went wrong, a lot of it on offense. We didn't even really get to the defense, mostly because I know Deebo Samuel had a really good play. He's awesome. George Kittle made a big play down the field. But honestly, for the most part, I thought the defense was okay last night. But the one conversation I do want to have, last season, DVOA is something that measures value in terms of offense, defense, special teams, in terms of league average. Very similar, not the same. I don't want to make the comparisons across sports, but kind of like WAR in baseball. And the Packers last season finished 28th in defensive DVOA. And we all gave Mike Patton a pass because we said, okay, washed Clay, bad Nick Perry, hurt Nick Perry, playing dudes like Eddie Pleasant down the stretch. He played a lot of different guys over the course of last season. And they finished 28th, so we gave him. But then this year, Z, Preston, Amos, Savage, Gary, those are 5 new names right there that they added to the defense alone. They brought back Ibrahim Campbell. They've got him on the field now. They've got him in the fold. They were relying on some leaps from some different guys. They cut Mike Daniels because he didn't fit Mike Patton's scheme. Now, granted, Mike Daniels hasn't done anything to make the Packers regret that. It looks like Green Bay turned out right in that regard. That said, going into last night's game, Green Bay's defensive DVOA was 19th. They're going to drop after that performance. They're going to be in the bottom third of the league again. This is a guy who, after week 3, Mike Patton, we were talking about worrying about losing him as a head coach type candidate for another team. My question now, Jason, is are we 100% sure that Mike Patton should be the defensive coordinator in 2020?
No, he's going to have to earn it, and I don't know if they need to move on. Matt LaFleur's got to be comfortable with who's running his defense, and he inherited Mike Patton. That was forced upon him. The first part of this season, the first 4 or 5 games, it looked like a great marriage, and it was going to work out, and you have players taking pictures with Mike Patton and showering him with love in team meetings and all this other kind of stuff. And now the defense struggles in certain spots, and now Mike Patton is the whipping boy. And I'm not saying that he's not accountable, but it shouldn't be a foregone conclusion that he comes back. You've got to find the right guy that can get the most out of these players. And you've got to, listen, you got to self-scout, and you've got to keep your options open every season. Coaches are under contract. You can't just break a contract. But if there's somebody out there who is clearly a good fit for you as a head coach, and they're a good fit for your defense, and you've got, your internal scout guys and say, listen, this is what this guy does. He can really make something out of this. He can do something with this. If we can bring into this or that in the off season, this guy's really good at getting more out of this area, then you have to get after it. You got to look at the talent that's on your roster. You've got 2 young, capable cornerbacks in Kevin King and Jair Alexander. Kevin King is getting roasted, and really not fairly so. And I think to your point too, everybody, once again, I want to urge you all to realize that there's a reason why we're not standing on NFL sidelines calling plays. I don't know the first thing. Listen, I played 1 year. I've been around football for a long time. I know enough just through osmosis that I've absorbed about defensive coverages and schemes and different things, and I can speak some of the language. I would be crapping my pants if I had to put together a defensive game plan right now. We're not coaches. We're not out there. We don't belong out there. So if you're going to sit there and you're going to break down somebody's performance and you're going to chastise, this and that person for this, make sure that truly, I know we roll our eyes when the players say and the coaches say, you know what? Joe Witt used to say too, and I think and I don't know if Winston Moss said it too, like, oh, well, do you know what the assignment was? When they were asked and criticized by the media, hey, what's going on with this guy? Why is he struggling? Well, is he struggling? Do you know what his assignment is on that play? If you don't, you can't really go off on it. Now, Mike Patton, obviously, that's his job. He's paid to know all that stuff. He's paid to put his defense in the best possible position. There are some talent deficiencies, and there's definitely a lack of speed. Oren Burks has not developed for whatever reason. He has not developed and stepped up to help Blake Martinez. Yeah, some of these things just, it's kind of a perfect storm of certain guys not coming up. You can't blame injuries because fortunately they've been healthy. So that's not in the equation right now. But, that's why I say I don't know if Mike Patton should or shouldn't come back, because once again, is Ibrahim Campbell, is Blake Martinez, is Will Redmond, Shannon Sullivan, are these guys really the type of guys at the bottom of the depth charts or in their positions that should be making impactful plays that if we're in a Super Bowl, you could count on to make a play or two? I don't know the answer to that question. So it's unknown, but Mike Patton should absolutely not be guaranteed to return beyond this season.
Yeah, and I'm not calling for him to be fired. I kind of take pride on the idea of I want to know what happened and why it happened. That's kind of some of the stuff you were talking about. So last night when I see Kevin King turn the complete wrong way, something sparked in my head of somebody had to have done, somebody effed up is basically what I say when that happened. Whether it was King turning the wrong way or somebody jumping or if they caught him, which Matt LaFleur explained it today. It was a really fun explanation if you want to listen to that. That being said, basically what I'm getting at is I don't want to be fire the coach guy, because everyone, that seems to be the first thing. Well, fire the coordinator. That'll fix everything. And I was kind of that way with Dom Capers for a while. I was like, how much can you really blame Dom Capers? When today I was talking with Jeremy Vanderlinden from Cheesehead TV Live, and he was telling me, we were talking about the 49ers playoff game in 2013, the freezing cold one at Lambeau Field. It's like by the end of that game, the Packers' outside edge rushers were Andy Malumba, undrafted free agent, and Dayton Jones. Neither player is in the league anymore 5 years later. Dayton Jones had never played standing up to that point. How mad can you really be at Dom Capers if that happens? So that's one example. All I'm saying is everybody points to Patton as this genius and, we've got the best defensive mind in the division and all that kind of stuff, which was never really the case. Mike Zimmer has always been kind of that guy. But beside the point, I think that that's a conversation that needs to be had. Now, am I willing to give Patton another year, give Rashawn Gary a chance to have the year 2 leap, give Darnell Savage a chance to do that? But, I mean, really, honestly, if you look at it, who has he missed on his unit this year because of injuries? Almost nobody. And don't you think that a defense with two guys, Darius and Preston Smith, both have 10 sacks. They have 20 and a half sacks between the two of them. That alone should have you in the top half of the league. Jair Alexander is a star. I know he's dropped some interceptions, and we've been hard on him. He was targeted once last night. If they're not hearing a corner's name, that's a good thing. Adrian Amos, assignment sure player. Kenny Clark, disruptive line of scrimmage player. I really struggle to see how Green Bay is not as good on defense as I think they should be. I think their talent level is higher. And we talked about this a lot. Jason, you and I, we said this line a million times with Dom Capers before they finally fired him. At what point does the investment that they've made not reach the results? The Packers have given a lot of draft capital, easy for me to say, capital to this defense. A lot of free agents. Every free agent dollar, save for the one to Billy Turner this offseason, was spent on defense. They spent 2 first-round picks on defense. And a lot of their drafts still went to the defensive side of the ball. I need to see more. And again, I'm not saying fire the coach, but I think that's a conversation that can be had. We're out of time. We're going to move on. For those of you guys, maybe you can't hear, but the baby's crying, so I'm assuming that I should probably tend to that. That might be a good idea. But be sure to check out our YouTube channel, Pulse of the Pack. Check us out on Twitter. It's at Packer Pulse. Follow Jason. He's at Jason Prone. You can follow me at Jacob Westendorf. One other nice thing that I want to point out, and I said this last night, game-to-game momentum is not a real thing. It does not exist. So what happened Sunday night has no bearing on what will happen this Sunday afternoon. That's a positive thing. Brian Bulaga avoided a serious injury. That's really the only big good news that could affect one thing from week to week. So we'll talk more about that when we talk Giants later this week. Thank you guys for listening to the show. And, of course, as always, it's over. Thank God that's over. Go, Pack, go.